All right. Hello, guys, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be in Unit 10, Vietnam in the 1970s, talking about Lesson 3, Women's Rights. This is going to be the second wave of feminism, where we are going to be talking about women fighting for equality. They've already gotten the right to vote in the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. Make sure you write down your heading. Make sure that you write down the EQ. How did the women's rights movement challenge society's views about women? And here we go. Okay. Feminism, if you didn't know, is where people believe that women should be treated equally to men. Men and women should be treated equally. In political, social, and economic, all these realms, women should be treated equally. Men and women can both be feminists and believe that women should be treated equally. And in fact, girls, I would urge you to make sure that you settle down and find a man. Just kidding. But when you do, if you do, make sure he's a feminist, okay? Make sure that he is a feminist, somebody who believes in a partnership rather than in domineering. Because for most of America's history, it has not been the case that women have been treated equally. They have been treated as second-class citizens. If you go far enough back to when, like, colonial times, when America was a colony of the British, there was this idea of coverture. And coverture said that a woman was literally the property of a man. And you take this forward into the 1800s, when a woman's place was defined as the house, the cult of the domestic, the cult of the house. They had books that were like, woman, a man's best friend, woman, something to come home to. She was treated no better than a dog, basically. That a woman's place is in the kitchen, you know, taking care of the kids and stuff. And a man's place was to work. And we see this extension, you know, in the 1950s. We're just talking about the nuclear family and the role of the woman as the housewife in the suburbs and things like that. For most of American history, this has been the case, with some exceptions. Remember that you did have the first wave of feminism, the first women's civil rights movement that had worked for about a century, for about 100 years, to achieve suffrage, to achieve the right for women to vote in this country, which finally culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment in the year 1920. That was the efforts of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and, you know, going into the World War I era, younger women like Alice Paul. Their efforts had been to get women a voice in this country so that they could affect change and start to get women other rights, because being able to vote is how you affect change. And they wanted for women to be treated equally in society, to have opportunities, because previously, you know, women would not be in control of their own money. Even if they were working, it would be the man in their life that was in control of their paycheck. It would be their husband if they were married. It would be their father if they were not. And speaking of which, a woman was expected to get married. And a woman who was married, again, from those old ideas of coverture, she's kind of the property of her husband. For a lot of the 1800s, a lot of women in many states couldn't even really own property. It was very difficult. Many women were not even able to get access to, like, a divorce. There's a lot of cases of domestic abuse, and women couldn't get out of those relationships because they had no rights to speak of, okay? So this is what women's civil rights is about. Now, for the housewives of the 1950s, remember, this is in the era of the baby boom. This is after World War II, when you're having all these babies being born from 1946 to 1964, 76 million of them. More women were settling down at a younger age, early 20s, and having more kids, on average 3 to 4 children from 1946 to 1964. And because of this, there's this renewed emphasis in the 1950s on a woman being in the house, that she is supposed to be the housewife and the mother. And there were some women who were not content to just do that. Of course, you know, I'm sure most of these women, they love their families, they love their kids, but, you know, they wanted more out of life. And one such housewife woman was Betty Friedan. She lived this life. She'd been a college graduate, worked really hard to succeed where many women, you know, were not able to get into school at this time. It was incredibly hard to break that glass ceiling for a woman to go to college and graduate. And she did all that. And then she, you know, met a man and they married, and then that was it. That was all she had. She got married, she had kids, and that's her life, period. That's where it stopped. And it's not that she didn't love her children or her husband, it's just she wanted more out of life. And so she wrote a book about her experiences. And that book is called The Feminine Mystique. It was written in the 1950s. It gets published in the early 1960s. And this book is going to have a huge impact on women's civil rights in America. It's going to basically kickstart, it's going to launch the women's civil rights movement of the 1960s through the 1980s. So The Feminine Mystique, this book is about what women want, and they want to have more in life than just being the housewife. That doesn't mean they don't want to be housewives, they just want more. They want to have the same opportunities as men. For most women in the 1950s, and even into the 1960s and 70s, their opportunities are closed to them. Okay, a lot of jobs wouldn't even hire women, wouldn't even think about hiring a woman, or if a woman got pregnant, they were fired. A lot of jobs that did hire women, they paid less. Women were making like almost half of what men were making, which prompted, remember, President Kennedy to sign the Equal Pay Act in 1963. And we still haven't closed the gender pay gap to this day. Women are only making like 80 something cents for every dollar that men make to this day. So they're working and getting paid less, having less jobs that they can even get hired for, having less educational opportunities. Most opportunities were closed to them. And women who did have steady work, as secretaries or as something like that, they were oftentimes being sexually harassed in the workplace, unable to have a good career, unable to enjoy their lives. And so that's what The Feminine Mystique was about. It was about these housewives wanting more, wanting to have those opportunities to live their life and be what they wanted to be. And in 1966, Betty Friedan, the author of The Feminine Mystique, and Gloria Steinem, who had been a journalist, a news reporter for a magazine. She actually worked for many magazines. She did a cover for, she did an expose article for Playboy, basically the Playboy Mansion, where she went undercover as one of the Playboy bunnies and wrote about how demeaning and sexually objectified women were. And she wrote about this in her magazine that she created called Miss Magazine, which was one of the first magazines just entirely about, women's empowerment and women's civil rights and women's issues. So these two women, Gloria Steinem, you can see right here, and Betty Friedan, they're going to help found this new organization that's entirely about women's civil rights, that will be fighting for civil rights just as the African-American civil rights we've learned about and the Chicano civil rights we've learned about. This is an organization for women's civil rights called NOW. We want equality now, like the old W.E.B. Du Bois, right? And it stands for the National Organization of Women. So NOW is going to be fighting for female empowerment, for women to have equal access in the workforce, for an end to sexual harassment, fighting for equal pay, and for all of those things. And yeah, as far as the gender pay gap goes, and as far as opportunities go, women are still not even close to this day. Women were making about half of what men were making up until the early 1960s, working the same jobs, okay, the same hours, getting paid that much less just because they were a woman. Like I said, back in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, before women got the right to vote even, many women wanted an end to alcoholic consumption because they weren't in control of their own finances even. So we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go because the gender pay gap, it's closed, but it's still about like, I think 82 cents a woman makes for every dollar a man makes. And that's because you still have a lot of women who the only jobs they can get are those that are low paying. Think like daycare, or think like domestic servant stuff. They're like cleaning houses and things like that. Those jobs don't pay as much. And then the highest paying jobs, think of like the CEOs of businesses and stuff. You still have very few women that are the leaders of businesses. That's the glass ceiling, this invisible line of discrimination that women face. And then as far as women achieving political equality, we've come a long way. We have women who are working and elected to local, state, and national office, but still haven't closed that glass ceiling. Remember, Hillary Clinton was the closest we came in 2016. She won the popular vote for presidents of the United States. She beat Donald Trump by over 3 million votes, but she didn't win in the Electoral College. And so we didn't get to call her Madam President. So we still, to this day, have not had a female president. Kamala Harris, our vice president under Joe Biden, is a huge moment for women's rights that we have a female vice president, but we still haven't reached, we haven't broken the glass ceiling. We still haven't had a woman president yet. In fact, today in Congress, there's only about 20% of our Congress women, people who are women in Congress. It's 80% who are still men. And yet think about Congress, they're supposed to represent the American public. What percentage of the American public do you guys think are women? It's right over half, like 52 or more percent. So like, yeah, it's just it's not representative of who we are. Women still aren't getting those high positions. So that's what we're talking about. And yeah, as far as discrimination that women face in the workforce and in the workplace, there's still the case where many jobs, they will discriminate against a woman because she could get pregnant and not be working for several months, and employers don't want to deal with that. And so they'll literally deny a woman a position, or fire her even because she's pregnant. There's all kinds of discrimination that women face. Remember, women are oftentimes also more likely to end up with children, working as a single mom than like the man is. And so that's why you also have more women in poverty, because they're having to support their families that they've been left with. So there's still a lot of issues that women face even to this day. Now in 1972, there's going to be Title IX, this very important government law, like statute, that gets passed, and it's going to ban gender discrimination in educational institutions, including public and even higher educational institutions like colleges, and offer financial incentives for federal aid. So this is where for every dollar that the government spends for programs, academic, sports, you name it, in schools and in colleges, that they spend, every dollar they spend on a boy, they must also spend on a girl. Okay, that's Title IX. And so if you're a female athlete, you have Title IX to thank for basically being able to play your sports, being able to play, and for your school to have the money to fund, your team for playing volleyball and basketball and track and soccer and all these other sports that we have. For women being able to be a part of bands and being able to be a part of art and all these other things. Every dollar that goes towards males, the school must also spend that same amount of money on female programs, which is why a lot of colleges, like especially in Texas, think about like football programs are huge, right, in our state. And so, public universities, they spend a lot of money on these football programs that are only for the male athletes. And that's why a lot of these colleges in Texas, they don't have the funding to pay for like male soccer programs, because they have, women's soccer, it's a collegiate sport and stuff, but then oftentimes the men's just is at the club level. And that's because they spent most of their budgets on the football program. And then they have to spend, every dollar that they spend on the men's programs, they have to spend on the women's programs. And so that didn't leave enough in the male budget for basically like soccer and things. Anyway, that all comes from Title IX. Also cases of gender discrimination in college or in high school, or gender sexual harassment, or even cases of rape will also be dealt with through Title IX, like we've had happen with Baylor in the past couple of years with their allegations of sexual abuse and harassment against women. So the Equal Pay Act, remember, We're on the Equal Pay Act. That was passed in 1963 under President Kennedy, and it said equal pay for equal work. We are still working to close the gender pay gap, like I've said, for the previous reasons. And this new civil rights movement, it was about having more modern attitudes towards women. Okay, not seeing women as objects, as things. That's called objectification. Okay, like we see in commercials all the time. Not judging somebody based on how they look, but judging them for, like MLK said, the content of their character, who they are. Okay, why is it fair that a woman gets judged for what she looks like, first of all, and a man gets judged for what he's done? Why do we have those views? Why do we have that perspective? Okay. And again, that's what the women's civil rights movement that began in the 1960s, that was what that was about countering those ideas of objectification, about judging women for who they were and their worth as humans and what they have to contribute in society as citizens and for their brains and for those things. So anyway, we will talk more about that. Under Title IX, you can see that the number of female athletes in both high school and in college is going to increase dramatically. That's the purple bar chart there. The purple bar is going to increase dramatically over the 30, 40 years since Title IX was first enacted in 1972. And that's, again, every dollar that is spent on male programs, these schools must also spend an equal amount on female programs. Okay. The case of Roe v. Wade in 1972 is also going to be huge for women's rights. This is the Supreme Court case that is basically going to say that a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion. Okay. Now, abortion is a very controversial subject today. Many family rights groups and conservative groups believe that killing an unborn fetus is akin to murder. While many women's rights groups and more liberal organizations, they believe that abortion is the right of a person to decide for themselves what they want to do to their, and with their own body. It's a right to privacy and basically choice. So you have this pro-choice / pro-life debates going on in America today. And what the Supreme Court said in the 1970s in Roe v. Wade was basically that in the first trimester, because pregnancies are over 9 months, so that's split into 3 trimesters. In the first trimester, a woman has a legal right to have an abortion. Only in the first, though, not in the second or the third trimesters. And many of the more conservative southern states, they have basically enacted laws since Roe v. Wade in the 1970s to make it very difficult or even illegal for a woman to get her constitutional right to an abortion, such as Texas. This is where you have a lot of pro-life conservative people that protest at abortion clinics, such as places like Planned Parenthood, that also do other things for women's health and cancer screenings. But basically, this is a big issue in the United States, mostly due to a lot of our religious background and due to politics. But it centers around the Supreme Court's decision on how they justified legalizing abortion in the first 3 months. It centers around the Fourth Amendment argument. The Fourth Amendment's the one that says that if the police, want to search your home, they have to have what? They have to have that search warrant. What that creates is an inherent right to your privacy, like within your own home, or, like if the police want to search your car, it applies to your vehicle as well. Or like if they want to search your pockets, it applies to your person. So the Supreme Court took that a step further in Roe v. Wade, and basically with these prior precedents said it also applies to your body, that basically you are in charge and you get to decide what happens to your body. And that's why a woman has a right to decide for herself if she wants to have an abortion in the first 3 months. Okay, that's not any religious group or any man or any other woman or anybody else that gets to decide for her. That's she herself gets to decide what she wants to do with her own body, because it's the woman who has to bear the pregnancy and childbirth, not the man, unfortunately. All right. In the 1920s, way back in the first wave of feminism, when they were fighting for suffrage, the right to vote, there's those suffragettes and their outfits. Alice Paul and her National Women's Party, they are going to add to this fight in 1923 an equal rights amendment that they wanted to propose to the Constitution. And an equal rights amendment would have guaranteed basically that women should be treated equally under the law to men. Okay, it would end a lot of the workplace and hiring discrimination and lack of opportunities that women had faced. Now, in the 1920s, this failed. It didn't even get passed by Congress. Okay, and it's going to be brought up again every single Congress until we get here to the second wave of feminism, into the 1960s and 1970s, and this modern women's civil rights movement. And in the 1970s, it gets proposed and it passes through Congress, through both the House and the Senate. Now, in order for an amendment to become part of the Constitution, to be ratified or passed, once it passes in Congress, it then goes to the states for ratification. And it has to pass with like 3/4 of all the states agreeing on it. And so that would be 38 states would have to agree to pass this equal rights amendment. But again, all we would say is that women should be treated equally under the law to men. And in the late 1970s, early 1980s, it fell just 3 states shy of being ratified. Some states also rescinded their initial ratification. But yeah, at least 3 states more were needed. So it became very close, but it did not pass. Now, it is worth noting here on this map, Texas was one of the states that did agree to pass this. So I don't normally give any compliments to Texas. So here you go, Texas, there's one for you. Good job. But this Equal Rights Amendment, it's going to continue to be proposed. I think one of the latest proposals for it was back in 2007. They probably had some sense. It still has not become part of our Constitution. And one of the big reasons why the Equal Rights Amendment has continued, let me get my picture away from there. One of the big reasons why the Equal Rights Amendment has continued to fail time and time again to pass is not only because of sexism, discrimination against women, and misogyny, where you have many men who are sexist against women and don't believe a woman should be equal in society, but also because of women themselves, conservative women such as Phyllis Schlafly, who led the Stop ERA campaign. And you might be thinking, it seems very strange that women themselves would be fighting against an equal rights amendment that would guarantee women are supposed to be treated equally to men. Why would women do that? So let me tell you, many conservative women feel that this amendment would infringe on their rights as women to be treated as a protected group. If women were equal to men, they argue, for instance, then women wouldn't be getting alimony payments or, child welfare payments, from divorce settlements and stuff. Or like in the case of the military, that women would not be, or would be eligible for the draft, the military draft, just as men are. If women are equal to men, women would be eligible for the draft. So they say women would lose those protected rights that we have as women. And enough states apparently found those arguments believable enough to still prevent this from being passed to this day. There's Phyllis Schlafly. She was a lawyer. She was a happy housewife. It's part of the getting into the era of family values. Here she is, just I think a few months before she died there in 2016, campaigning for Donald Trump. There she is. All right, and so that's where we're going to end today. Basically, the idea that women have made great strides in their fight for equality or civil rights. Women have closed the gender pay gap significantly, although it does still exist. Women have also, with like the hashtag Me Too movement that began from the director Harvey Weinstein and others, that women have been fighting against sexual harassment the last few years, very successfully, getting a very active media campaign against prominent male figures who have been abusing their power to sexually harass women. Women have made many strides. More women today actually graduate from college, are more successful academically than men. That's huge. About half of all the graduates in recent years from law schools and medical schools are women. That's huge. You know, my mom, when she became a veterinarian in the 1970s, she was one of like only 2 veterinarians that were women to graduate that year. Like, they were so rare. So women have done a lot to improve their equality the last several decades since this movement began in the 1960s, but we still have a long way to go. And so I'm going to leave you with that. Don't forget, please, to answer your essential question in your summary, and I will talk to you later. Thank you, guys.